I'm going to try something new today, or I'll be making this little item that can be used as a trivet or cutting board for small items. I'll be cutting the saying and shapes from half-inch thick red oak, then glue it to another piece of half-inch red oak. I'll cut the circle shape and drill out the hole. Then I'll do the new part using epoxy resin to fill in the cutouts. Keep watching to see the entire process. I'm cutting this top piece from half-inch thick red oak, and I've chosen a number 7 Pegas modified geometry blade. The Pegas scroll saw is a pleasure to work with because the upper and lower blade holders are tightened with just a thumb screw. Some scroll saws need tools for one or both. It doesn't matter where you start making the cuts on top, and you can cut them in any order. I started at the top row of letters, and I'll cut from left to right because I tend to do these in a logical order. It's just the way my brain works and the way I'm most comfortable working. These letters are much larger than some I've cut on other patterns, but I'll still follow my usual procedure for cutting letters. I think that developing and following good habits is a practice that delivers consistent results from project to project. For most patterns, I cut right on the line, but for letters, I try to cut on the inside of the line. The reason for this is simple. For letters like A, O, and others, there are middle sections that will be left attached to the rest of the pattern by very small tabs. If you cut it all outside the lines, this may cause the material to break, and the letter will be ruined unless there's a backer to glue the broken piece to. By cutting inside the lines, I leave a tiny bit of insurance material to lessen the likelihood of this happening. There's nothing worse than spending an hour or more cutting only to go a little past the line and have a piece break. There are many 90-degree turns required to cut these letters, and this can be challenging for a beginner on the scroll saw. But to produce high-quality results, you need to learn how to do these well. Here's how I make 90-degree or other sharp angles on interior cuts. From the pilot hole, cut to a corner with the blade going right to the point. Next, back the blade up slightly into the curve you've just created, and swivel the workpiece 90 degrees to the next direction you want to cut. Put pressure back on and feed the workpiece into the blade once again. Repeat that procedure at each corner. There is an alternative method I use, generally just on the first corner closest to the pilot hole. After threading the blade through the pilot hole, cut to the corner as usual. But instead of backing up slightly, back up all the way to the pilot hole, swing the workpiece 180 degrees, then back up the blade all the way to the corner where you stopped before. You should be able to easily turn 90 degrees, then start cutting in the next direction. When you're first learning this technique, there are a couple of things you can do to make things easier. The first would be to use a smaller blade. A smaller blade is less aggressive cutting, and it can obviously make much tighter turns. The second thing you can do is slow down the blade speed if you have a variable speed saw like the Pegas. I'm going to make all the interior cuts on the top, then glue it to the back before making the last cut to turn it into a circle. In my experience, it's less work to do it this way than to cut each piece into a circle first and then glue them together. When you cut the pieces separately, they will never match perfectly, and you'll have to do some sanding along the edge, so why not just wait and sand them both in one operation? The plans for this showed 2 versions. One had an epoxy filling inside the letters and fruit shapes, and one was plain. I've never worked with epoxy before, and I think it's time to give it a try. Bearwood supplies my source for the Pegas scroll saw and Pegas modified geometry blades, and they sell epoxy supplies, so I'm going to order from them. I'll leave a link in the description so you can purchase from them as well. It will be an affiliate link, and I will earn a small commission on any orders placed using this link. With all the letters cut, I moved on to the shapes at the bottom. There weren't any difficult cuts here, so you can enjoy the last few minutes of cutting before moving on to the glue-up step. There's a circle at the top which will go through both layers as a means to hang this item when it's not in use. I'll drill that out with a Forstner bit after the glue-up dries. There were a few little fuzzies on the back of the top panel that I removed by hand with a sheet of 150 grit sandpaper before I glued the 2 pieces together. Then I applied some tight bond white glue to the back of the top side and spread it around using a brush. These acid brushes are cheap, but you can still use them more than once if you rinse them off between uses. The only problem with them is that they'll sometimes lose a few bristles. I just picked them out of the glue before putting the pieces together. I made sure to get glue into all those small spots between the letters. Without glue, they might be likely to break off at some later date as the trivet was handled, and I wouldn't want that to happen. I could use any type of clamps for this, so I chose to use F clamps. This type of clamp has a tendency to move pieces around while being tightened, but these two pieces will be trimmed after the glue dries, so that's not a consideration here. I started with 4 clamps, one for each corner. But since the corners would be cut off when I turned the square into a circle, I placed the clamps so they reached further in and put pressure on 4 points of the circle at more or less the 3, 6, 9, and 12 o'clock positions. Since my audience consists of older males, I know you understand that reference. If I was teaching a class to a bunch of kids under 18, they would have no idea what that meant. With the glue dried, I removed the clamps and I can now make the circular exterior cut. Since the thickness is now a full 1 inch, I'm using a number 9 Pegasus modified geometry blade. At this thickness, the cutting moves slowly, but it's best not to try to hurry it along by putting extra pressure on the blade. That's likely to cause the blade to overheat and start burning the wood, or to cause the blade to flex and not leave a 90-degree cut. Neither of these outcomes is desirable. I peeled off the pattern and everything looks good so far. The next step will be to take this to the disc sander to touch up the edge. Then I'll move on to something I've never done before, working with epoxy resin. I'm looking forward to it. This is my first experience working with epoxy resin, so at the risk of looking like a complete idiot, I'm going to record this. The components need to be mixed at a 3-to-1 ratio, so I'm going to try 3 ounces of the first part and 1 of the second. I have no idea if that will be enough to fill all the letters and shapes, but this stuff is expensive enough that I don't want to waste any. The process reminded me of my high school chemistry class, and that was not a good memory. It was the only course I came close to failing. I purchased the epoxy and dyes from Bearwood Supply, my supplier for the Pegasus scroll saw and Pegasus modified geometry plates. In my experience, they always ship orders quickly, and their customer service has always been excellent as well. They're located in Canada, so there's no sales tax either. Just so you know, I have an affiliate relationship with them, so if you use the links supplied in the description, I'll receive a small commission on any items you purchase. I mixed the 2 chemicals and added a couple drops of the red dye. That's the color Steve Good used in the illustration, and I thought it looked good, so I decided to go with it as well. I found a reusable cup with a pour spout and used that to transfer the epoxy to the places it was needed. I filled each space to the top with a little bit to spare. By the time I'd finished, I noticed some of the spaces needed a little more, so my guess is that some of the epoxy is being absorbed by the wood. I had some of the mix left over, but not much, so I poured that into a disposable plastic cup to let it dry. You don't want to dump the stuff down the drain, as it could build up and eventually clog the drain. I'll wait until tomorrow when it's solid and then toss it. The edges of this project needed a roundover, so I had to decide just how much of a roundover they needed. Sometimes I break the corners by hand with a piece of sandpaper just to remove the sharp edge. Other times I'll use a router to round over the top edge, but use sandpaper on the bottom. For this project, I thought a roundover on the top and bottom using a router would give me the look and feel I wanted. I had a roundover bit in the router table, but it was only 1/4 inch. I wanted a larger radius, so I chose a 3/8 inch radius roundover bit for this 1 inch thick piece. I chucked the bit into my DeWalt compact router and made the roundover on both surfaces. The DeWalt router is a recent acquisition, and I recorded a short video reviewing my initial impressions of it. I'll leave a link if you want to watch that later. When using a handheld router, you need to pay attention to several safety-related issues. You need to wear eye protection, as the router generates a lot of chips and sawdust. For that reason, a dust mask is also a good idea. Hearing protection is a must because the router is loud and hearing loss is cumulative. Last, pay attention to feed direction. You want to feed the workpiece into the router bit against the direction of rotation. This means working from left to right when the router is on top of the wood, but working from right to left when the router is mounted in a table under the wood. After completing the roundovers on the edges, I moved to my sanding table for the last step before finishing. I started with 100 grit and worked my way up to 220 grit sandpaper with a random orbit sander. There were a few spots where there was epoxy on top of the wood, which I did not want. I sanded until the wood was once again exposed, and then I worked my way through the grits. Worked my way through the grits? Sounds like something like eating breakfast in the South. Once I was done sanding, I decided to use a butcher block oil and conditioner for the finish. That way, this can be used as a small chopping block or as a trivet. I have to say, I enjoyed working with the epoxy. What do you think? Would you like to see more epoxy projects? If you haven't already done so, this would be a good time to subscribe to the channel. That and a like are small gestures on your part that help me grow this channel. If you're ready for some more woodworking, a suggestion for the next video to watch should be on the screen.